With me, House Intel Committee member Will Hurd, Republican from Texas, and former U.S. Ambassador to Syria, Theodore Kattouf. Nice to see both of you.
Pleasure.
First, you, Congressman, do you think Russia was involved before it happened?
Well, Russia is their close relationship with Syria, especially in that conflict zone. To think that the Syrians would do something as serious as utilize chemical weapons and not tell one of their closest partners it's hard for me to imagine that. But we have to get this right. We have to do a proper review of the intelligence known before and after in order to make a case if indeed the Russians were involved. If the Russians were involved, I think this helps us build a larger coalition of countries to work against the Russians and put pressure on the Russians to see Bashar al-Assad leave power.
Ambassador, you were an ambassador to Syria, among other nations. Do you think that the president of Syria, Assad, would act and gas his people without getting the nod from Putin?
I think it's quite possible. We have to remember that Putin and Turkey convoked a peace conference, or at least a conference to have a ceasefire in Astana, Kazakhstan not long ago. And the opposition fighters and the Assad regime agreed to a ceasefire, and Assad broke it in the environs of Damascus against Russia's express instructions. I've seen the Assads operate over many years, father and son, and they're not pawns of anyone. So while I'm not saying the Russians didn't know, I'm saying it's quite possible they didn't.
Ambassador, who needs who more? Does Assad need Putin more than Putin needs him, or the other way around?
Well, Assad needs Putin more than Putin needs him. But one thing I would point out is even without Russia, he would still have Iran backing him, and along with all the militias they bring, including Hezbollah, Shiite militias from Iraq, Pakistani and Afghan mercenaries and the like. So Assad, he would not fold even if Russia said, we're done with you.
Congressman, what would you like to have the Secretary of State convey to Vladimir Putin tomorrow, assuming that he gets to speak to him?
I think he needs to make it very clear that the support of the Assad regime is unacceptable, and that Bashar al-Assad is more of a problem to him than a partner.
What does that mean, though? What does it mean unacceptable? Does it mean, like, you know, is that sort of like just tell him he's bad, or is something like, you know, there's got to be some teeth to that. Just not just tell him.
The future. What I think that means is that the future political solution of who controls Syria means Assad is not involved. You know, the reason we have a problem with refugees is because of Assad. The reason that there was a civil war that created a space to allow a group like ISIS to come in is because of Assad. Assad has violated the Chemical Weapons Convention on more than a dozen occasions. We've talked about the one from a week ago, but he's done this on many occasions. So he cannot be involved in the future of the country, and that means the Russians need to pull back their air force and to support Assad and Syrian forces.
Which brings me to this in question, Ambassador. If Assad goes, who takes over? Well,
that's the real question nobody addresses, and it's a very serious question. And while I agree with the congressman completely that Assad's a brute, a war criminal, and that he caused a lot of the refugee problem, we have to remember who was on the other side. Idlib province, where he used chemical weapons, is largely controlled by an al-Qaeda affiliate. Think of that. The same people who did 9/11, who did subway attacks in London and Madrid, etc., are active in Syria. They have an Islamist coalition behind them, and they're probably the strongest fighting force in the country. So, you know, when we talk about regime change, we did regime change in Iraq. We did regime change in Libya. You have to expect unexpected consequences or unintended consequences.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.